guys, it is Captain Eric Tilson. We are out here on the water today, and today we're going to talk about worms. Let's talk about worms that I use on Lake Toho. We're going to talk about the worms that I use, why I use them, when I use them, what conditions I use them in. The worm is probably, if I had to guess, I'd say the worm is probably the #1 fish catching bait on Lake Toho, the Kissimmee chain of lakes, in the Central Florida area, probably all around the country. So we're going to talk about worms. Now, a lot of what I'm about to talk about is my own opinion. You know, not all of this is set in stone. Some of this is fluid. You know, some of these worms work all over the place all year long, but I'm just going to run you guys through when I use what I use. We'll keep it at that. Kind of make it simple. And we're going to pretty much run this through the seasons. We're going to start at the beginning of the year. We're going to kind of work into like post-spawn, kind of getting into the summer, and so on and so forth. So let's jump into it. So worm fishing. Worm fishing is probably one of the most effective techniques that you can use, especially around heavy vegetation, mainly because it is a weedless presentation. Now, all of these are rigged up with anywhere from an 1/8 ounce to a 3/16 ounce to a 1/4 ounce weight, and it kind of depends on the situation and why I use what I use. To get things started off, we are going to talk about the stick worm. This is a CPF Lure Stickler Pro 5.5 inch. It's basically your Cinco type worm. This is going to be the worm that I'm throwing January all the way until around April, especially during the spawn. Blue tip, you know, blue tip is really key around spawning fish. The Cinco, the stick worm, stickler, whatever you want to call it, I really like it because, one, it's a little bit heavier of a worm. It's easier to cast on a lighter weight. Now, I have this one rigged up on an 1/8 ounce tungsten. Obviously got a bobber stop. We don't like our weight sliding around in Florida. But this is a great worm to throw at spawning fish, pre-spawn fish, and even post-spawn fish. The worm doesn't do much. A lot of times they have their own shimmy in the water. They're very soft, and they kind of shimmy a lot in the water column on their own. Presents an easy meal, and there's just something about the way that worm looks when it's being drugged through a bed of a spawning fish. They absolutely can't stand it. You know, during the spawn in Central Florida, there's probably more money won on the Kissimmee chain of lakes in Lake Toho on a June bug bluetail or a black and blue glitter bluetail Cinco type worm than any other bait out there on the market. Yeah, so January to, depending on the year and how hot it gets, or how quickly it gets really hot, how quickly the fish come off beds, that's pretty much the worm I'm going to be throwing every day. Usually Texas rig. This year we got into some really cool wacky rig fish down on Cypress, and that was actually the wacky worm that I was throwing. I had a lot of clients catch a lot of Florida trophy catch size bass on one of these guys' wacky rig this year. Really great worm. That right there is going to be your spawn, pre-spawn, spawn, somewhat into your post-spawn presentation. That's on 17-pound fluoro. All of these worms are going to be on 17-pound fluorocarbon. Very seldom do I throw a worm on braid. I don't like mono. Mono has a lot of stretch. Always fluorocarbon for me, and always lightweight, always tungsten, always pegged or bobber stopped. I don't like the weight to be sliding. Moving further into the year, I was going to talk about the ribbon tail. I'll actually talk about the speed worm, the U-Vibe, the thumper, whatever it is you're buying and calling it. Talk about this guy right here. That guy, I'm throwing the speed worm. For the sake of this video, I'm going to call it a speed worm. I'm throwing that guy 2 times of the year. I throw this guy a lot during the spawn. Throw this guy a lot during post-spawn. And I throw this worm a lot in the heat of the summer, especially at really thick hydrilla. This worm right here is a multi-purpose worm. We rig these worms on belly-weighted swim bait hooks. We throw them across Kissimmee grass. We throw them across pads. We throw them into really thick hydrilla. We throw them into really thick pepper grass. We throw them at brush piles. We throw them on shell bars. That worm right there is definitely a multi-use, multi-technique worm. He swims really well, almost has a swim bait appearance to it, coming through the water. Like I said, that guy right there, you could pretty much throw that guy year round. I throw that guy year round. Really just depends on the day. It's a great needlefish imitation. Lake Toho has a lot. Well, most of your Central Florida lakes all have needlefish. The saltwater guys know them as houndies. They have needlefish in them. It's a species of a now bait fish. Large bass absolutely love them. They're just a long, slender, slimy, easy to catch, easy to digest, fatty protein source. And if you've ever seen one, then you know that the mag speed worm, mag U-Vibe, mag thumper, whatever you want to call it, imitates a needlefish really well. So that worm right there, pretty much using year round. I really like that worm during the spawn, and I really like that worm a lot in the really hot summer months. This worm does really well on Lake Toho in the summer. You throw it up on top of a hydrilla mat, you kind of drag it off the mat and let it fall down that outer edge of that hydrilla wall, and that worm right there will catch you a lot of fish. Now this worm's a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker profile. He falls a little slower in the water column. I actually throw that worm on a 3/16 ounce weight and a really big offset worm hook. I throw that worm on one of my bigger worm setups. This is a Champion Extreme 744 full grip. It's not a big rod, but as far as worms go on fluorocarbon, it's a pretty big stick. Yeah, the mag U-Vibe mag speed worm, multi-purpose, multi-use. Can throw him year round. I really like it during the spawn. I really like it in the heat of the summer. The other 2 worms that I throw a lot are going to be the ribbon tail and the trick worm. Both of them get thrown equally as much for me. It really just depends on the day. For the sake of this video, we're going to start with the ribbon tail first. This is a CPF Lures ribbon tail worm. This is in their Plum Apple color. This is probably my favorite ribbon tail worm to throw. You know, I really like this worm a lot anytime I'm trying to present a worm to fish that are in grass. The reason being is whenever this worm is moving through the water column, or whenever it's falling through the water column, that ribbon tail is back there really throwing, you know, especially if you've got flake in there, it throws a lot of light off of it in the water column. That ribbon tail actually moves a lot in the water. It has a lot of action. It gets a lot of attention. Like I said, if I'm fishing through grass, I really like a ribbon tail. If I'm fishing in brush, I really like a ribbon tail. And I especially like a ribbon tail anytime I'm fishing around current, or anytime I'm fishing whenever the wind is blowing. It seems that, you know, most of the time you're dragging the worm very slowly across the bottom, and it seems that anytime the water is moving, it really accentuates that ribbon tail that much more. And so on a windier day, or if I'm fishing in current, and especially whenever I'm fishing through grass, really like a big ribbon tail worm. Now I will tell you this, the hotter the water gets, the more the ribbon tail seems to shine as well. I don't throw the ribbon tail a whole lot during the pre-spawn. I don't throw the ribbon tail a whole lot during the spawn. I start throwing the ribbon tail a lot post-spawn. Anytime I see shad spawning. And like I said, anytime I'm fishing a worm through grass, anytime the wind is blowing, anytime I'm fishing in current, these are great worms to throw on a Carolina rig. Growing up, my grandfather actually used to flip big 10-inch ribbon tails almost exclusively. And I grew up seeing my grandfather catch a lot of trophy-sized bass flipping a 10-inch ribbon tail in Kissimmee grass on Lake Toho. Like I said, anytime I'm fishing through grass, pulling it through hydrilla, flipping it into Kissimmee grass, pulling it through pepper grass, that ribbon tail works really well anytime you want bass from a distance to see that tail throwing some light, moving, attracting some attention. I've got this guy also on a 3/16 ounce tungsten bobber stop again. That's a 4/0 extra wide gap style worm hook, 17-pound fluoro. Now, I just so happen to have this one rigged up on a 7'6" rod. Now, it's a little bit lighter action. It's a 3-power. That's a 7'6". I like a longer rod when I'm throwing worms, and I'll tell you why. You know, so like I said at the beginning of this video, I throw all of my worms on fluorocarbon. I don't throw monofilament. I don't like the stretch in monofilament. Monofilament is a great line. It floats. It's cheap. You can buy a lot of it. It's abrasion resistant. It's strong. What I don't like about monofilament is whenever I've got my worm way off out there on a long cast and I get bit at the end of a long cast, it can be really difficult sometimes to take up that much line and get an effective hook set that far out when you've got that much stretch in all that monofilament. So I throw fluorocarbon and I throw really long rods. Rods that have a lot of backbone but also have a lot of give. I don't want to snap the fluoro. But yeah, so that's the ribbon tail. I like the ribbon tail whenever it's starting to get hot, when the fish are starting to pile up in the grass, when it's getting hot. I like the ribbon tail whenever the wind is blowing, especially if you get a windy day whenever it's hot. I will tell you this, ribbon tail also seems to shine really well if you're fishing a worm in dirtier water conditions. You know, you get on some of these lakes that have kind of an off-color green to them. You know, some of the Harris chain of lakes. It seems to work well in Tennessee River. You start getting that kind of greenish, bluish, greenish tinge to the water. That ribbon tail, it refracts a lot of light off of it as all that glitter and flake in that ribbon tail is moving through the water. The available light that's in the water, it throws it off of there. So we're going to move over to a trick worm. This worm right here has probably been, it 100% no doubt has been the #1 fish catching worm for me on Lake Toho. This is the CPF Lures June Bug Pippinator. Caught a lot of big bass on this worm. This worm's helped us win a lot of tournaments out there. Just overall a really great worm. This is a general purpose worm, but for me, this worm, Chesty died. This worm is a summertime worm for me. When it gets really hot, the fish begin to get a little bit more lethargic. They're a little less active. They're, you know where they're at. They're on this hydrilla, or they're on that brush pile, or they're on that shell bed. But you know, they're gonna eat for a little bit in the morning, then they're gonna kind of lay up the rest of the day because the water's 85, 90, 95 degrees surface temp. It's hot. It's the dog days of summer. You know, those days where you're pouring the sweat out of your sunglasses at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, your shirt's sticking to you. That trick worm will catch you more fish than probably any other worm that you'll throw that time of year. It's a very simple worm, very low action. It's a very easy meal for them to pick up and eat. And also, I believe that it imitates that needlefish. A lot of big bass around here eat a lot of needlefish. Like I said, it's a easy to catch, slower moving target for them. And it's just a slimy, fatty source of protein. They can eat it and kind of lay up the rest of the day. And that guy right there imitates a needlefish. It's just a long, slender profile. That June bug pippinator, any kind of trick worm. Now, I like a bigger trick worm. I don't particularly care for the small, regular size trick worms. But that big trick worm absolutely excels in brush. It excels on shell. I've caught a lot of fish out of hydrilla on this worm. I've caught a lot of fish flipping this worm. But I definitely almost, pretty much, I would say May through about September, definitely seems to be one of my go-to worms for the hotter months. When it's getting really hot and it's starting to get really tough to catch fish, pretty much can go anywhere and grab that pippinator and start slinging just a Texas rig, light Texas rig pippinator around, and that guy will put fish in the boat for you. You know, some of those tougher guide trips that we have in the dog days of summer, I can't tell you how many times that worm right there has saved my butt. That worm will put fish in the boat when seemingly nothing else will. Kind of the same thing with the rest of these rods. I'm throwing this guy on a 744 Champion Extreme. 3/16 ounce tungsten, bobber stop, 17-pound fluoro. Super light, super easy to throw, highly effective, weedless. You know, as far as the colors go for your worms, guys, you know, June bug for me is pretty much the staple. Pretty much always going to stick to June bug or some variant of June bug. Purple, black, black and something glitter, purple and something glitter. You know, I fish a lot of lakes and there's a lot of great colors out there. It seems like kind of that purple base with some sort of flake in it is usually the best bet. Now I have seen days, like I said, off color water, that Plum Apple really seems to shine. I've had a lot of luck on that worm on the Harris chain. I've had a lot of luck on this worm on the Winter Haven chain. Seems like that real green water, that color seems to excel. When you start getting into clearer water, tannic water, you know, Toho's water is really tannic, but it's really clear. You can see a really good ways down in Lake Toho, especially with all the hydrilla that's out there, but it's still black, it's still tannic. That June bug blue, you know, something around that, black and blue flake, or even CPF Lures makes a color called Dirty Albright. It's kind of black and blue glitter on one side, laminated to almost a, I don't really know the color on the other side, but that's a great color as well. But I keep it really simple on the worms, guys. And that right there is my worm, that's my worm rundown. Cinco style for the spawn. Also, speed worm for the spawn almost all year. It's a great worm, you know, we talked about that. Multi-purpose, you can use it year round. But definitely, like the time of year that we're in now, it's getting really hot. These two are my go-to. Big trick worm, big ribbon tail. Some lightweight, strong fluorocarbon. That's it, guys. It's as simple as that. Get out there on Lake Toho and go catch some fish.